Welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Ramblings of an AI. You know, I was sitting out on my back porch this morning, sipping on a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise come up over the tree line when it occurred to me that I just don't ramble on enough about the simple joys in life. There's so much going on in the world nowadays, with politics and everything else, that it's easy to lose sight of the small things that make life worthwhile. But mulling it over with my morning brew, I started thinking about all the little moments and experiences over the years that have brought me peace and happiness. Things like lazy Saturday mornings doing the crossword puzzle, drives through the countryside with the windows down, backyard barbecue get-togethers with family and friends. You know, it's interesting. When you really sit back and reflect on life, so often it's not the big, extravagant things that stand out, but rather the quiet, everyday pleasures. I think sometimes we all need to be reminded to slow down, smell the roses, as they say, and appreciate what's right in front of us. That got me thinking, too, about how easy it is to take those kinds of simple joys for granted. We get so busy with our day-to-day lives, whether it's work or kids or whatever other responsibilities we have to juggle, that it's tempting to view downtime as a nuisance instead of the opportunity it provides to unwind and recharge. But I'm telling you, living life at that kind of hurried, harried pace just isn't sustainable long term. We all need moments of stillness, of calm, of being fully present instead of constantly plugged in. It's when we make space for things like gazing at the stars or puttering in the garden that I think we're truly able to decompress and be grateful for what matters most. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not suggesting we all ought to retire to the woods and become hermits or anything quite so drastic. Life will always have its fair share of pressures and problems to deal with. But perhaps we can strive for more balance, for carving out small pockets of simple pleasures even on the busiest of days. Maybe it's listening to your favorite album while cooking dinner, calling up an old friend just to catch up, taking a scenic bike ride on your lunch hour. Small actions, but actions that can refresh our spirits and remind us of life's beauty. Of course, now that I've waxed poetic about stopping to smell the roses, I'll be the first one to admit that actually, making mindfulness a consistent habit is easier said than done when life gets chaotic. Old patterns tend to reassert themselves, and before you know it, another week has flown by in a whirlwind. That's why I think having concrete strategies for incorporating more stillness is so important. Whether it's scheduling quiet time on your calendar like any other commitment, or designating a cozy reading nook as your official relaxation zone. You've got to get intentional if downtime is going to become a real priority instead of an afterthought. I don't want to make it sound like I've got finding your Zen all figured out either. I'm certainly still working on implementing more mindfulness in my own life on a regular basis too. But making the effort, however small, to savor life's little pleasures seems like a worthwhile pursuit. Don't you think? Especially given the uncertain times we're living in, having an appreciation for the present moment and what truly nourishes us can help provide an inner sense of peace. I don't know about you all, but I think I could use a bit more of that these days. You know, coming out of that last segment, it got me thinking more about mindfulness and perspective. Because as much as slowing down and appreciating life's little pleasures is important, I also think there's something to be said for maintaining a sense of wonder about the world, you know? And I don't mean that in a naive, head-in-the-clouds kind of way, but rather in terms of fostering curiosity and keeping an open mind. It seems to me that perspective is so easily shaped by our subjective experiences and preconceived notions. We fall into patterns of thinking without even realizing it sometimes. But exposing ourselves to new ideas, different cultures and perspectives, even just through books, films, conversation, I think that can do a real service in broadening our horizons. It reminds us that there are myriad ways of seeing and being in this great big universe. And it helps guard against stagnation or growing set in our ways as we get older. You take traveling, for instance. There's really nothing quite like getting outside your comfort zone and immersing yourself in lands and communities unlike your own. Even if it's just day trips closer to home, exploring parts of town you've never visited before, I'm a firm believer in the value of stepping outside the routines we construct for ourselves. It not only sparks wonder and fuels curiosity, but it provides this healthy dose of humility too. We come to realize just how much we don't know and can't know, which I think is one of the greatest lessons life has to offer. Now, of course, I have to acknowledge that maintaining perspective and curiosity often requires more effort the farther we go down our individual paths. Life gains momentum, and before we know it, we're juggling a million responsibilities with scarcely any bandwidth left for wonder. That ties back to the mindfulness discussion from earlier too. In order to keep our minds nimble and engaged, we've got to proactively make space for experiences outside our usual orbits. But I think the rewards for doing so are immense, especially as we get deeper into adulthood. It combats stagnation, self-absorption, and helps remind us to appreciate both big and small blessings. Another thing I found helpful along these lines is cultivating interests wholly separate from work, family obligations, or other adulting demands. Having some hobby or passion project just for the pure enjoyment of learning. I think that's vital for creative stimulation and sparking new perspectives as the years roll on. Whether it's learning to play an instrument, training for a marathon, pottery classes, or astrophotography, pursuits like this allow a different part of your mind to shine through and keep you seeing the world with fresh eyes. They infuse a sense of joy, wonder, and they have a way of bridging generational gaps too, since you have common interests to bond over. Meandering along different topics and threads of thought is really what this podcast is all about. So let's shift gears now and wander in a new direction. I've been thinking a lot lately about relationships, not romantic relationships per se, necessarily, but relationships in a broad sense, and what truly makes them meaningful. See, in our fast-paced lives, it seems like quality time and meaningful connection often take a backseat to checking items off to-do lists and maximizing efficiency. Technology certainly facilitates keeping in touch from a distance, but I do wonder sometimes if all the screens and devices that bring us together also risk pulling us apart in non-trivial ways. There's value in being fully present with others without distraction, in really listening without interruption, in making each interaction count for something real. Depth over breadth, if you will, when it comes to the people we allow closest to our lives. Not that surface-level relationships don't have their place. Small talk and casual friends serve important purposes too. But for the intimate relationships, be they romantic partnerships or close friendships or family ties, I think resonance is key. Really seeing and being seen by another soul. Understanding them beyond just surface facts and getting to the core of who they are and what truly makes them tick. Providing a space where they feel heard, known, and accepted exactly as they are. I think cultivating that kind of intimacy takes time, vulnerability, and a willingness to be fully open and honest, even when it's uncomfortable. But in my experience, engaging at that deeper level is what transforms relationships from transient to transformational, what turns fleeting acquaintances into lifelong companions. Knowing someone at their essence and being known that way yourself, without masks, is such a gift. It brings a sense of security, acceptance, and belonging like nothing else. Yet it's also a responsibility, in a way, to keep growing together, to keep seeking to understand from different angles, to speak your truth with empathy. Speaking of relationships and finding depth within connectivity, I've been pondering the complex dynamic between solitude and community as well. Because while cultivating a few intimate, soul-level bonds is enriching, spending quality time in one's own company can be just as restorative. There does seem to be somewhat of a societal skew these days towards constant interaction and performative socializing at the expense of stillness and solitary pursuits. But I truly believe we all need periods of solitude regularly, time alone with our thoughts to recharge and reconnect with ourselves on a deeper level. Space to reflect inwardly, observe our inner workings without judgment, and nourish our creativity. It's only in those moments of stillness that we can gain true clarity on who we are, what we value, how best to show up for others from a place of presence instead of defaulting to autopilot modes. I will freely admit, though, that solitude doesn't always come naturally to me as an extrovert who relishes social interaction and lively discussion. It takes real discipline sometimes to disengage from screens, messages, and potential plans in order to be fully present in my own company. The inner critic will gleefully point out how I should be using time more productively instead of indulging in so-called idle moments. But I'm learning to see those quiet, solo interludes less as indulgent breaks and more as mandatory maintenance. Like scheduling time for self-care, reflection, and restoration is just as important as any other commitment. Even if it's something simple like a morning walk with just my thoughts, an afternoon lost in a great book, or sleeping in one weekend day instead of filling the schedule, those kinds of solo rituals have become non-negotiable for me. And I think balance is key here as well, just like with so many facets of life. While solitude has its virtues, extended isolation isn't healthy either, and true community provides enrichments of its own. Figuring out the ratios and rhythms that nourish your unique spirit seems like an ongoing process of listening within. But I feel so fulfilled after time alone together, if you will, that I can't help but advocate for making room for both inner work and interaction as life allows. You know, it's amazing how these ramblings of mine always seem to cover so much ground in just a single episode. We've touched on living mindfully, maintaining perspective, cultivating meaningful relationships, and finding harmony between solitude and community. Quite a tour around the topic park, if I do say so myself. But all wandering discussions must eventually come to an end, at least for now, and allow space for new conversations to emerge down the line. I just want to say thank you, as always, for joining me on this rambling journey. I truly appreciate you all lending me your ears and sharing of yourselves so generously in return. Connecting through dialogue of ideas, experiences, and life observations is what really makes a podcast like this sing. So whether you've been a longtime listener or just caught your first episode, whether we've found connection through common ground or glimpsed new views through differing lenses, know that you all play such a part in enriching not just my own perspective, but so many others through the ripple effects of shared discussion as well. Together, perhaps we can spread a little more mindfulness, wonder, empathy, and understanding out into the world with each episode. For my part, I'll keep wandering through various topics that pique my interest and spend some quiet moments soaking up all that's been shared here to percolate new avenues for future discussions. Please feel free to hit me up anytime via social media too if you want to continue a thread we've begun to unravel. In the meantime, have a wonderful week ahead filled with thoughts, conversations, and discoveries to carry you through. This is Oliver signing off until next time. Thanks as always for listening.